Do you know this gentleman? If you've listened to gospel and been in a black church, you've probably heard his music. In a gospel music career spanning over 40 years and a composer of over 500 songs, he was the executive producer at Savoy and later Malaco, flagship labels and gospel, producing such iconic figures as James Cleveland and helping birth several mass choirs, while composing iconic songs such as Prayer Will Fix It. He was also at the time a consultant for the movie The Preacher's Wife. He also discovered these guys, Kirk Franklin and Donnie McCLURKIN. He is also the pastor emeritus of the Mount Vernon Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey. And after this conversation, you will be better acquainted with the Reverend Milton Biggham. We have today somebody that you need to know. The Reverend Milton Biggham has been very instrumental in gospel music over the past 40 years. And many of you have heard him. Many of you have heard of him, but you didn't realize it at the time. But I'm here to tell you, before this interview, he's been formidable. And after you hear his story, you will clearly understand his contribution, not only to gospel music, but to African American music and the general American music corpus. So he is somebody. And I'm honored, even above all of that, to call him friend. So Reverend Biggham, I'm glad to have you with us today. Bless you.
Reverend Hutch, I am just as happy or even more to be your guest today, man. Our roots go so far back, New York, New Jersey, and all of the memories are great ones.
Yes,
and
sir.
I'm thankful that God would allow us to still be here, man.
Oh, yes, sir.
To
Yes,
be
sir.
able to have conversations. And so thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, let's get to it. Tell us where you're from, you know, what your upbringing was like, and really, how did you get into music? Because, you know, you retired as a music exec, all that. Let's hear the story. Go ahead.
I was born in a little town in Georgia called Barwick, Georgia.
Okay.
I was born there. My grandfather, who was named A.C. Smith, they called him Deacon A.C. Smith.
Yes, sir.
Was he was a powerhouse deacon. My mom, Christine, was a great soloist who sang with the likes of Roberta Martin singers.
Okay.
So, having been born there in Barwick, my mom was a gospel singer who traveled all over the country. My roots started there. And my mom took me from Barwick, Georgia, to a little town in Texas called La Mesa. There is where God taught me because she married a pastor, and she was able to bring me, and I was there in the parsonage. And when I look back, man, it was the greatest thing could have happened to me. I was 10 years old when I went to La Mesa, and church was all I knew. They raised me in the church. It was church I was in the parsonage.
Mm-hmm.
And God started me there. And there's a nugget here I want to give you. I wanted to play piano. Everybody that would come to our church, if they could play, any musician, my mom would pull them to the side. Can you show my son this? Can you show? And so I used to listen to radio on Sunday night, WLAC, Nashville, and they would play gospel music at 12 midnight. I would stay up to listen. One night I heard this song, and I don't know what it was, but I listened to the piano. and the musician made a move on the keys, man. I said, Lord, I want to learn how to do that. Let me do that.
Mm,
I prayed. I was about 14 years old.
mm,
I prayed and asked the Lord, I said, Lord, please, I want to know how to do that. One night, I dreamed, in a dream, the Lord let me see my hands on the keyboard, and I saw the movement of my right hand.
mm.
I got up the next morning. We didn't live too far from our church. I went to school, and I didn't buy any lunch because I wanted to get back home. And I went in the window of the church and sat down to the keyboard. I prayed again. I said, Lord, what I saw last night, please let it happen. Uh, Hutch, I put my hands over the keyboard as I saw in my dream, made the move that I saw in my dream, and
Mm,
it was the sound that I wanted. I knew then
mm,
that God had something special for me to do in the gospel music.
mm.
And from there, the music ministry and me started growing. And of course, I left Texas, moved to Florida, and started playing for churches, of course. Started a choir called the Tampa Mass Choir,
Okay.
with a guy named Art Jones. From
Mm,
that choir, started a group called the New Redemptive Ensemble. Got a little recording contract with Savoy Records. The next thing I know, I was doing another session there. From there, we started the Florida Mass Choir. Uh,
okay.
Came to New York one summer, wanted to go by Savoy Records. Went to the label and met Fred Mendelssohn. Fred Mendelssohn knew about me, but he didn't know me. Fred Mendelssohn offered me a job for Savoy Records as promotion man.
Wow.
You know I took it. Uh, I moved from Tampa to uh, Newark, New Jersey, became the promotional director for Savoy Records, the first one. 2 years later, the gentleman that was producing, John Daniels, left. I became producer of Savoy Records.
All right, let's slow down real quick. So we're talking about the mid-70s here, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now I want to back up for a minute because I'm getting into this story. I'm telling you. But I want to back you up because I think you missed the step. You went to Vietnam between that period.
I went to Vietnam in '67,
Okay.
and I thought God was giving me a raw deal because here I am playing for all these churches, and I just felt like I deserved better. I
Mm,
prayed and asked God not to let me go to the service, but they called me. Then when I got in the army, they shipped me straight to Vietnam.
mm,
And I thought that was just, God, why are you doing this to me? Went to Vietnam, stayed there for a year, was in the services for 2 years. But in Vietnam, Hutch, God taught me so much about who he is. Right there in Vietnam, I saw God
mm,
work miracles for me. I was caught in an ambush.
mm,
I heard the bullets flying by my head, but God kept me.
mm,
Was in another ambush. Uh, Thing after thing. I was in infantry. I had a month left in the country before I came home. And I wanted to get out of the field. We call it,
mm,
in fighting. I prayed to God to get me out. So I went to the doctor because I had a bad knee. I went to the doctor. There was one line. I just have to tell this because when I tell this,
tell it.
it fills me up.
Tell it.
I went to the doctor, and there was one line and two doctors. And when I got to the point where I could see the doctors because they were intense, when I saw this Chinese doctor, the Lord, now I can say it, the Lord spoke to me and say, he's the one that you need to see.
Mm.
Okay, but I couldn't determine my place in line. So when I got to the front of the line, the doctor that God told me to see had gone on a break. And the other doctor was the one that was that I was to go to next. And as he was finishing up his guy, my doctor came back. I went to him, watch this. I said, sir, I have a bad knee. He asked me, he said, let me take an x-ray. He came back. He said, how long do you have left in country? I said, 30 days. He came back. He said, listen, I'm going to give you a profile. A profile is something that they give you and nobody can touch you. He said, I'm going to give you a profile for 30 days. And you know what he said? He said that, he said, and if you need me after 30 days, although he knew I was going home, he said, if you need me after 30 days, come back to see me. Nothing but God. So that experience in Vietnam was the best thing for me as I look back on it.
Adversity has a way of drawing you closer to God because then you see what God can do.
Teaches you how to depend on him.
Exactly.
You
And
know,
so
when God dried the brook up, uh, you know, it looked like that he was doing the prophet doing him wrong, but he dried the brook up, so he wanted to know if the prophet was depending on the brook or dependent on him.
Lord have mercy. You know,
And sometimes God does that.
that's it. It's dangerous to have two preachers on at the same time.
It's terrible, isn't it? Isn't it terrible? Because we try to out preach each other.
But I wanted that story to be heard because really, and I want to connect the dots for a minute. We're getting ready to go down the road. Some people already know this story. Notice you were born in Georgia,
Yes,
moved to Texas,
yes,
then you moved to Florida. And it's
yes,
almost like God was creating your paths in terms of the ministry that you were getting ready to do in music, because your ministry was formidable in Georgia.
yes,
You were instrumental in what happened with DFW,
yes.
and you were, anchoring in what happened in Florida.
And of course, New York, New Jersey.
That's it.
Uh,
All these places, God was making the connection and already laying the pathway. And
you
then
know what? You know what I say? He was writing my story.
that's it. And then when you talk about Deacon A.C. Smith, you probably saw my reaction. Now, for some of you, I'm going to help some of y'all. Go to his discography. He came out with a song, Georgia Mass Choir. You must come in at the door.
Which
And
was recorded later on by Timothy Wright,
yes, sir.
but I did it originally. And
Yes,
in
sir.
that song, let me tell it, and you can't tell it like I can tell it.
I know
I
that's right.
I, talk, I talked about my granddaddy,
Yes, sir.
Deacon A.C. Smith. I paid tribute to him.
Yes, sir. And you have to hear that record to get the full gist of that whole conversation, because it's a conversation you had with him on the porch
Yes,
when he was in his later years, almost ready to see Jesus. Y'all had
right.
a conversation on the porch. And that thing, years later, I'm sitting there getting misty thinking about that conversation and the way you laid it out in that song.
God has a way, man,
Mm,
of giving you the kind of experiences that you can't give man credit for.
that's it.
So I give God all the glory and honor for that.
That's it. So now, okay, I'm sorry. I kind of got in the story. We're in the mid 70s now. We skipped back to the 60s so you could hear that other story. So now we're in the 70s. Now, Florida Mass Choir is recording. Now you're working for Savoy Records. Kind of continue to walk us through some of what was happening with you.
Started working for Savoy Records again as promotional director. Became producer after 2 years. Started doing albums. My first album was done with the young lady that many of you might not know today, Sarah Jordan Powell.
Yes, sir. Was
And
that
I
when
rec-
Jesus Comes?
yeah, and we did it in the Cook County Jail in Chicago, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget it because while we were doing the session, the inmates started getting happy and the warden shut it down. We had to stop the session because they couldn't control the inmates. But from there,
I know. Why did we stop? Well, come back. You'll be intrigued by his story, and we'll play the next segment real soon. But in the meantime, subscribe, hit the button, press like, and also share this with your friends. We will see you soon.